posted here before a few years back. Since then, paranormal episodes in my life have not completely stopped, but I have not kept a journal or written about it. Today, I want to talk about what has been happening for the last 4 years, but first, a brief story of my neighborhood. I now live in Woodland Heights, the Bronx Woodland, a population of about 7,000. It's an Irish middle-class neighborhood at the very north end of the borough of the Bronx in New York City. The place is very old, interesting, and rich in history. There are some old beautiful places here, parks, churches, and the Woodland Cemetery, which just turned 150 years old this past weekend. On August 1778, this land witnessed the massacre of the Mohican warriors, who were fighting on the side of patriots against the British. They died courageously at the hands of Colonial James Grave and his Queen Rangers. To keep this story short, the neighborhood where I have resided for the last 4 years was built directly on top of Indian battlefield and burial grounds. I first moved here a few months before my first daughter was born. Ever since, things have happened at home that defy what most believe to be logical. My place is less than half a block away from the cemetery. Ever since my family and I moved here, we always felt a presence, never threatening, but a presence. My wife feels less comfortable with it than I do. It feels like a male presence, but I'm not sure if he has acknowledged us. It feels as if he is just doing his own thing most of the time. The first time my wife and I sensed it, or him, was in the bathroom. One of us would be in there alone, and we would surely think that the other one was on the other side of the shower curtain. Then, when the curtain was pulled, there was nobody there, and she would have asked me if I was in the bathroom when she was there. Surely, I was not. The next episode consisted of the toys of my child were turning on at nighttime by themselves and appearing at different places that I had placed them before. I know the toys were off before it went to bed. Other episodes involved my wife and I were sitting in the living room, watching TV, and we could feel sudden movement behind us. Yesterday, something dropped on the kitchen that was well placed and could not have just dropped. Sometimes I can feel him or see some blurry shadow from my peripheral view, and I let him know that I've just acknowledged him. When my wife does feel him, she asks me, "Did you just feel that or see that?" My child has felt him too. I remember a specific episode where she walked from the living room to her room by herself, said something to someone, and then came out of there running and scared. Yesterday, she and I were playing in the living room when all of a sudden, she looks towards the room and stares. I did not say anything and just looked at her. Then she looked at me and asked, "Who is that in the room?" I told my wife this, and she told me that this happened to her in the past too, when the two of them were at home. In addition, the other night, I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom when I saw a figure in the doorway. I stopped on my tracks. I noticed he was not looking straight at me, but when he did, he disappeared. That is all I got for today, even though those are not the only occurrences, and I'm sure my wife does not tell me everything. I will try to keep a journal and give some more updates. Thank you. Any comments are welcome, and if you ever are in the New York City area, come by my neighborhood and explore its city. I wrote about this briefly in a prior article in 2001. To recap, we moved into 455A Sackett Street when I was 14 years old on April 1st, 1998. From the moment we moved in, something was so not right. It was an incredibly dark apartment, though we would have been thrilled because it was the first apartment we'd ever had with more than one floor. There were 3 floors, including the basement, and it was nice if you could ignore the feeling of someone standing just behind you or staring at you wherever you went. Within 2 weeks of moving in, I was raped in my own bedroom by a man from the neighborhood. An elderly woman who'd lived right next door for most of our life informed us that no one had occupied our apartment for more than a year at a time, since as long as she could remember. She also related that terrible tragedies befell of all said people, with only a few weeks of moving in, continuing through the day they moved out. Though we all had eerie feelings in the apartment, we had not noticed anything too weird. The apartment was very uninviting, cold, and damp. We tried to decorate it, warm it up a little, but nothing helped. Another thing was that no matter what we did, we could never get a phone installed. We had the phone company over about 4 times to fix the wires, but no matter what they did, we would absolutely get nothing, not even static, so we were pretty isolated. The entire time we were there, weird happenings continued. The ceiling above my brother's bed collapsed. The only reason he wasn't hurt is because he got to use the bathroom. A fire started in my room. The fire department never determined why. If my friend hadn't stopped by and rang my bell, I would have continued sleeping. Within 5 minutes of answering the bell, my neighbor came out screaming that my room was on fire. I ran up and the entire back wall was in flames. I tried to put it out with a blanket, and unbeknownst to me, the door had closed behind me. It went from daylight to dark in 2 minutes, and I started to pass out. Thankfully, my friend ran up and opened the door, carrying me down the stairs, or I would have been literal toast. After that, my neighbor confided in us that strange things have always gone on in my building. In the 30s or 40s, a fire had killed a little boy within a month of the family moving in. And in the 60s, a couple were whacked by the mob because of some insidious affair. There were no records because the children's records had been burned in a fire, so we couldn't get any information more than what the people said. There were other things that happened. A friend of mine coming into my apartment and seeing a little boy in burnt rags staring at her in my bathroom mirror. She ran out crying and refused to set foot in my door again. Another friend who slept over. Note, both friends were not told of our experiences, and awoke in the middle of the night swearing that she saw a woman walk into my room through the door. My brother and I heard children crying and laughing one day downstairs, and when we tried to leave my mother's room, we were locked in, even though there was no lock, for an hour before it finally opened. My mother was downstairs doing the laundry when the lights turned off in the basement, and she felt a cold, scaly hand grab her shoulder. Needless to say, my dad did the laundry after that. Weird smells, sounds, and the feeling that something or someone did not want you there. That something bad was going to happen to you, and that you were not welcome at all. We moved out a year later to the day later, as soon as we could find a new apartment. We found out some more after that. The people that moved in after us tried to renovate the basement and found the body of a little boy in the wall. They left suddenly one night not too long after and never returned. Another couple moved in and left as inexplicably as the last, and so on and so forth to this day. Since then, we met a woman whom had gone to my mother's office. She's a nurse that works in a doctor's office because of a nervous condition. My mother noticed the address on her insurance card didn't match the one listed, and the woman explained she only lived at 55A Sackett Street for a few months and had to leave because her mother had died along with various other tragedies from the first week of moving in. My mother asked if the woman ever noticed anything weird. Well, the woman explained exactly what we had gone through. Perhaps the cause of her condition? We're all fine now, happy to be out of there, and we've moved on. We still see our old neighbor once in a while, and she always says the best thing we ever did was move out of that godforsaken house. Needless to say, we agree. We've not been haunted since, and life is good. If there's one thing we learned, I'd say it was to trust our instincts. Being fortunate enough to stay in New York over the winter, I've been visiting some of our ordinary New York tourist destinations, and some not so ordinary. A few weeks ago, after learning there was a free ferry between Lower Manhattan and Staten Island, I decided to hitch a ride. Not only would it offer me the chance to get that money shot of the Statue of Liberty, but it would also enable me to check out Staten Island and say that I've been there. Unsure of what to do when arriving at Staten Island, I pulled out my phone while waiting at the ferry terminal and started researching potential attractions. One which was easily accessible on foot was the Staten Island Museum. As I happened to discover, though, there are actually 2 buildings called the Staten Island Museum, each run by the same organization. One is only a couple of blocks from the St. George Ferry Terminal, and the other is at the Snug Harbor Cultural Center and Botanical Gardens, around a 20-minute walk along the terrace. Unaware of this fact at the time, I was being directed by the map on my phone to the latter of those 2. It didn't bother me, though. Upon arriving at Snug Harbor, I found that there was far more to see and do than I would have had the chance to experience staying within a small radius of the ferry terminal. Inside the museum, I was alone within the exhibit rooms for the most part. The only exceptions to this were in the first two rooms, where there were some professional photographers taking shots of the items on display. As I made my way around the exhibits, I consistently experienced the eerie feeling that I was being watched. I tried to chalk this down to paranoia and softly hummed some hymns to myself to calm my nerves. At one point, I was freaked out by the sound of footsteps behind me, but was relieved to learn that they were just coming from a security guard patrolling the hall between exhibits. Throughout my wanderings around the rest of Snug Harbor's grounds and gardens, the same eerie feeling continued to plague me. Despite this, I still had a fantastic time. As I walked the grounds, I ran into a museum staff member who I had met earlier, and we had a brief discussion. She was returning to the museum after going out to buy herself a cup of tea. Beautiful, yet haunting, was how I described the center's grounds to her. I couldn't have known at the time how appropriate my description would be. A few days later, I was transferring all of my photos from my stay in New York up until that point onto my computer. Friends back home had encouraged me to take lots of pictures and upload them to Facebook so that I could share my adventures with them. While sifting through the photos to decide which ones to upload, one particular shot caught my eye. It was a photo in which I had taken at the entrance to the Snug Harbor Cultural Center upon first arriving at the site. What it must have initially brushed off as lens flare or mist began to strike me as having much more of a defined shape, that of a hooded robe or cloak, to be more precise. I messaged my best friend, who was in New York with me and staying in the same apartment building. "I think I've caught an apparition on camera," I told him. My friend and I took a closer look at the photo in his room, and soon we began to also spot a face in the midst of the apparition. I've uploaded the original photo, taken with an iPhone camera. The face is positioned from the first pillar on the left of the building to the second pillar. It may be difficult to spot at first. I have some friends who have seen it who have spotted the figure and face instantly, some who have had to take a look at the photo for a while before seeing it, and some who cannot see it at all and conclude it to be paranoia. Further research on the Snug Harbor site since spotting the figure in my photo has revealed to me that the location is famously haunted by a number of spirits, which was a nice find for me, as it backed up what I had experienced there.